Welcome to the dead Rite, where forgotten histories rise again. The rain over Edinburgh was a perpetual, damp sigh. It misted the windows of the central police station and turned the cobblestones of the high street into a treacherous, gleaming river. For Constable Alastair Finch, it was the soundtrack to a career of mundane misery, drunken brawls, petty thefts, and the endless, damp paperwork that followed. He was a man built for solidity, not speed, with a constable's broad shoulders and a weary patience etched into his face. At 55, he was counting the days until his pension, dreaming of a dry cottage in the borders far from the city's reek of coal smoke and despair. He'd seen his share of darkness, of course. A constable in Old Reekie didn't avoid it. But he'd learned to box it up, label it, and store it away in the dusty archives of his mind. That was until the night of October 17, 1910. The call came in just after 11. A whisper of a thing passed from a terrified beat cop to the sergeant, and finally to Chief Inspector Wallace, a man whose granite features seemed to have been carved by a lifetime of frowning. Wallace emerged from his office, his usual ruddy complexion pale. "Finch! McNair! With me." There was no bluster, no barked orders. Just a cold, flat command. Sergeant McNair, a young, ambitious man with a wax moustache he fancied made him look like a hussar, jumped to attention. Finch, with a weary groan, pushed himself from his desk. "Trouble, sir?" McNair asked, falling into step behind the inspector as they descended the stone steps to the courtyard where a Black Maria was waiting, its engine chuffing softly. Wallace didn't answer. He just climbed into the passenger seat, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle twitched in his cheek. The driver, a young constable named Davy, looked terrified. The atmosphere in the vehicle was thick enough to taste a metallic blend of fear and dread. They drove in silence, away from the gaslit thoroughfares, climbing into the warren of narrow closes and steep winds that clung to the city's spine. The tenements here leaned in like gossips, their windows dark, their foundations steeped in centuries of shadow. Finally, Davy brought the vehicle to a halt on a cul-de-sac named Wind's End, a dead-end alley that lived up to its name. It was a place forgotten by time and the city's planners, a crumbling testament to Edinburgh's medieval past. Number 7, Wind's End, was a building that seemed to suck the feeble light from the air. Its windows were boarded, its door a slab of black, water-swollen oak. 2 uniformed officers stood guard, their faces ashen, their lanterns held before them like talismans against the dark. One of them, a veteran named Donnelly, visibly flinched as Wallace approached. "Inspector," Donnelly said, his voice a hoarse scrape. It's bad, sir. We've not touched a thing. Just confirmed there's no one living." "Who reported it?" Wallace asked, his eyes fixed on the door. "Anonymous, sir. A lad. Said he was dared to look through the letterbox. He's down at the station now with his mother. The doctor's given him a sedative. He won't stop laughing." A cold finger traced its way down Finch's spine. Laughter was wrong. It didn't belong here, in this rain-soaked silence. Wallace nodded grimly. "Right. McNair, you're with me. Finch, you're on the door. No one in or out without my say-so." Finch was happy to oblige. He'd seen enough horrors from the periphery, he had no desire to step into their heart. He took up a post beside Donnelly, watching as Wallace and the eager McNair disappeared into the yawning darkness of the doorway. The silence that followed was profound. The rain seemed to hush. No sound came from the house. It was as if the building had swallowed the 2 men whole. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Donnelly began to mutter a Hail Mary under his breath, his rosary beads clicking softly in his palm. Then, a sound. A choked, wet gasp from within. Finch's hand went to his truncheon. The doorway darkened, and McNair stumbled out. He fell to his knees on the wet cobbles, his body convulsing. He wasn't laughing. He was vomiting, great, heaving retches that spoke of a soul-deep revulsion. His fine moustache was soiled, his eyes wide with a terror so absolute it stripped him of all his pretense. Wallace emerged a moment later. He didn't vomit. He didn't scream. He simply walked out, closed the door behind him with a quiet, final click, and leaned against the damp stone of the building. His hands were trembling. He looked at Finch, and for a fleeting second, Finch saw something in the chief inspector's eyes he had never seen before, utter, unadulterated helplessness. "Finch," Wallace said, his voice ragged. "I need you to go in." "Sir?" "McNair." "McNair is useless," Wallace snapped, a flicker of his old self returning. "I need a man who's not going to lose his head. I need you to see it. To bear witness." Protest died on Finch's lips. This wasn't a request. It was an order from a man standing on the edge of a precipice. Nodding slowly, Finch took a lantern from a petrified constable and stepped towards the door. The smell hit him first. It wasn't the smell of decay he'd known from river corpses or suicides found weeks too late. This was different. It was sweet, cloyingly so, like overripe fruit and honey, but underpinned by a foul, coppery tang of blood and something else, something ancient and dusty, like the air from a long unopened tomb. The lantern light pushed back the gloom of a narrow hallway. The floor was bare stone, the walls mildewed and peeling. The air was frigid, a cold that seeped through his greatcoat and settled in his bones. He could hear the faint drip of water somewhere, a steady, maddening percussion. He moved forward, his boots echoing in the tomb-like silence. The first door off the hallway stood ajar. Pushing it open, he raised his lantern. The room was a sitting room, or had been once. The furniture was rotten, consumed by damp and mold. But it was the walls that made Finch's breath catch in his throat. They were covered in writing. Not scrawled in paint or chalk, but etched into the very plaster and stone, deep and frantic, as if done with a nail or a knife. The script was chaotic, overlapping, a mad spider's web of text in dozens of languages. He saw Latin, Greek, English, and symbols he could not begin to recognize. Phrases jumped out at him, the eye in the wall sees. The skin is a lie? It hungers for the song. The key is in the listening. A profound sense of wrongness, of intellectual violation, washed over him. This was more than madness. This was a calculated insanity. A soft sound from deeper within the house pulled him forward. A wet, rhythmic shushing sound, like a butcher tenderizing meat. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the oppressive silence. He followed the sound to the end of the hall, to a door that hung crookedly on its hinges. He pushed it open. The lantern light spilled into the kitchen, and Constable Alastair Finch's world shattered. The room was a charnel house. But it was not the quantity of blood that struck him, though there was enough to cover the flagstones in a thick, congealing lake. It was the artistry of it. The horror was methodical. In the center of the room, suspended from a meat hook embedded in a blackened ceiling beam, was what was left of a man. He had been unmade. His skin had been removed in one perfect, seamless sheet and laid out on the large kitchen table like a grotesque map, pegged taut at the corners. Upon this fleshy parchment, intricate patterns had been carved, the same insane script from the walls, but rendered in a painstaking, loving detail. The man's musculature, his organs, his skeletal structure, they had been meticulously separated and arranged around the room on every available surface like a medical exhibit curated by a demon. The heart sat pulsing softly in a bowl of brine. The lungs, inflated and deflated with a slow, ghastly rhythm. The source of the shushing sound. The eyes were missing from their sockets. And the worst of it, the detail that broke through Finch's professional numbness and unleashed a primal, screaming terror, was the head. It was placed on the mantelpiece, facing the room. The face was a mask of transcendent agony. But the man's throat had been cut so deeply he was nearly decapitated, and from the gaping wound, something had been inserted and pulled taut. His own intestines. They had been drawn out from his abdominal cavity and used to suture his mouth into a wide, grotesque smile. Finch stumbled back, his stomach heaving. He crashed into the wall, and the impact dislodged something. A small, leather-bound journal fell from a shelf, landing at his feet. Acting on some desperate, automatic instinct, he snatched it up and shoved it into the deep pocket of his greatcoat just as Wallace appeared in the doorway, his face a stony mask. "Out, Finch," Wallace said, his voice hollow. "Now." Stumbling into the rain-washed alley, Finch drew great, ragged breaths of the clean, damp air. It did nothing to cleanse the smell from his nostrils or the image from his mind. He saw McNair being loaded into the back of the Maria, catatonic. He saw Wallace gathering the men. "Listen to me," Wallace said, his voice low and fierce, cutting through the rain. "What is in that house is not for public consumption. It is not for the newspapers. It is not for your wives, your priests, or your dreams. You will speak of it to no one. Not to each other. Not to me. This case is closed. It was a gas leak. A tragedy. A body found too late for identification. Do you understand me?" The men, pale and shaken, nodded mutely. The unspoken command was clear: this is a darkness we cannot police. We bury it. The official report was a masterpiece of omission. A derelict property. A deceased individual of no fixed abode. Cause of death, misadventure. The body was quietly incinerated. The evidence, what little was collected, was sealed in a lead-lined box and buried in the deepest, most forgotten vault beneath the station. Number 7, Wind's End was boarded up, its door bricked over, and within a month, it was as if it had never existed. But Alistair Finch could not forget. The image of that room was burned onto the back of his eyelids. In the quiet of his small, tidy house, with the rain pattering against the windows, he could still hear the wet, rhythmic shushing of those lungs. And he had the journal. It took him a week to muster the courage to take it from his coat pocket. The leather was smooth, stained dark in places he tried not to think about. The pages were filled with the same frantic script that had covered the walls, but here it was more coherent, the ravings of a mind descending into an abyss but clinging to a terrible purpose. The author was a Dr. Erasmus Sibley, a theologian and philosopher from the university, a man known for his studies of esoteric texts. The early entries were normal, notes on Gnostic Gospels, comparisons of creation myths, musings on the nature of reality. Then, the tone began to change. October 3, 1910, the veil is not merely a spiritual metaphor. The texts of the Codex Shiar, dismissed as heresy, speak of it as a physical membrane, a separation between our reality and what lies next to us, always pressing in. They called it the skin of the world. And like any skin, it can be pierced. October 9, 1910, the calculations are complex. The alignment is critical. The place of thinning is here, in this city. I have found it. A locus of silence and forgetting. Number 7, Wind's End. The air is thin here. I can hear it, a hum, a vibration just below the threshold of hearing. A song from the other side. October 12, 1910, it speaks to me in the silence. It has no name I can pronounce. It is the listener. It asks for only one thing, a key. A door must be opened from this side. The lock is perception. The key is a symphony of agony, a prayer of unmaking sung by a conscious soul at the precise moment of the celestial alignment. It must be a work of art. A testament. The entries became more disjointed, filled with complex geometric diagrams and musical notations that made Finch's head ache. Sibley wrote of stitching the lie of flesh to perceive the true music of the spheres. He believed he wasn't committing murder, but performing a sacrament, a necessary act to pierce the veil and behold a glorious, terrible truth. The final entry, dated October 17th, was a single, triumphant sentence, scrawled in a hand that was barely human. "Tonight, I sing for it, and it will listen, and the eye will open." Finch closed the journal, his hands shaking. This was beyond any crime of passion or madness. This was a cosmic transgression. Sibley hadn't just killed a man, he had attempted to use his agony as a battering ram against the walls of reality itself. And the police had covered it up. They had buried it not just to avoid panic, but because, on some primal level, Wallace had understood that some truths are carcinogenic to the human soul. Life tried to return to normal, but the world had grown thin for Finch. The city's noises seemed to mask a deeper, more threatening silence. He started seeing things from the corner of his eye, flickers of movement where there was none, patches of shadow that seemed too deep, too dense. He began to dread the rain, for in its patter he heard the echo of that wet, rhythmic sound from the kitchen. And then the dream started. He was back in the house on Wind's End. But the body on the hook was no longer the unknown victim. It was him. He was flayed, his nerves exposed to the frigid air. And in the dream, he wasn't alone. Something was in the room with him, something vast and patient and utterly attentive. It had no form he could comprehend, but he could feel its presence like a pressure on his mind, a great eye regarding his agony not with malice, but with a terrifying, impersonal curiosity. He was the symphony. It was the listener. He would wake up screaming, his skin crawling with the phantom sensation of being unfolded. The lack of sleep made him haggard. He jumped at shadows. His work suffered. Inspector Wallace noticed, his eyes narrowing with concern and something else, recognition. The dreams, Finch. His research was a futile attempt to build a seawall against the rising tide of his fear. It was only making it worse. Every ancient text, every reference to things that lurked in the angles of time, felt like a confirmation. Sibley hadn't been mad. He had been horribly, catastrophically right. One night, a month after the case, Finch was walking his beat near the old town, the rain a steady, cold drizzle. The streets were deserted. As he turned down a narrow close, his lantern flickered. The flame guttered, shrank to a blue pinprick, and then went out entirely, plunging him into absolute blackness. Cursing, he fumbled for his matches. The sound of the rain seemed to recede, replaced by a profound, suffocating silence. And then he heard it. Faint at first, then clearer. A wet, rhythmic shushing sound. It was coming from ahead of him, down the close. His blood ran cold. It couldn't be. He was miles from Wind's End. He struck a match. The sudden flare of light pushed the darkness back a few feet. And in that small circle of illumination, he saw something. A patch of the stone wall ahead was different. It wasn't stone anymore. It was smooth, wet, and organic. It pulsed softly. Etched into its surface was a familiar, frantic script. As he watched, frozen in terror, the surface of the wall blistered. A seam opened, not a crack in the mortar, but a tear in the very fabric of things. And from within the tear, he saw not darkness, but a terrible, intelligent light. And he felt it. The listener, Its attention had focused on him. It had heard his fear, his research, his sleepless nights. He had not forgotten it, and so it had not forgotten him. The match burned down to his fingers. He cried out and dropped it. In the instant of returning darkness, he heard a new sound, a soft, sloughing, scraping noise, moving towards him through the close. He ran. He ran blindly, screaming, crashing into walls, his heart hammering against his ribs. He didn't stop until he burst out onto the Royal Mile, under the gaslights, surrounded by the comforting, mundane sounds of a carriage horse clopping past. He leaned against a wall, gasping, sobbing. People stared at him. He was a madman. The next morning, he went to Wallace. He spilled everything, the journal, the research, the thing in the clothes. He expected disbelief, anger. Instead, Wallace just looked tired, older than his years. He poured 2 large whiskies and pushed one across the desk to Finch. "I told you not to look into it, Constable," he said, his voice flat. The house on Wind's End was a wound. Our job was to put a bandage on it and pray it heals. You've picked at the scab. It's real, Finch whispered, the whiskey doing nothing to warm the cold in his soul. What Sibley was trying to do, it's real. And it's not over. It's never over, Wallace said, downing his drink in one go. Sibley's song was powerful. It didn't open the door, but it thinned the veil. It got its attention. And now that it's aware of this place, of us, these little ruptures will keep happening. It's tasting our reality. Testing its strength. We have to do something. Finch cried. We can't just ignore it. What would you suggest? Wallace asked, his eyes bleak. Arrest it? Charge it with disturbing the peace? There are no laws for this, Finch. There is no procedure. There is only silence. We must be quiet and hope it loses interest. We are mice in the walls of a great house. The only way to survive is to never, ever let the homeowner know you are there. Sibley screamed. We must be silent. Finch left the office defeated. Wallace's philosophy of helplessness was its own kind of horror. He couldn't accept it. He was a policeman. His job was to impose order on chaos. This was the ultimate chaos. That night, the dream was more vivid than ever. He was on the hook, flayed. The listener was there, its presence immense. But this time, there was a message, not in words, but in pure concept seared into his mind. The song was sweet, but incomplete. The singer was weak. The instrument was flawed. You have seen the score. You have heard the melody. You will sing the final verse. He woke with a scream trapped in his throat. He knew, with a terrifying certainty, what it wanted. Sibley's journal. The journal was not just a record, it was the score. And Finch, having read it, having internalized its horror, was now a potential conductor. The listener wanted him to finish the symphony. He leapt from his bed, grabbed the journal from his bedside table, and stumbled down to his small kitchen hearth. He crumpled paper, laid kindling, his hands shaking so badly he could barely strike a match. No, he muttered. No, I won't. I'll burn it. He held the match to the paper. The flame caught, began to lick at the kindling. He held the journal over the fledgling fire. A sound stopped him. It was a small, happy sound. A child's laughter. It came from right outside his back door. He froze. It was 3 in the morning. He lived in a quiet, childless street. The laughter came again, closer this time. right on the other side of the door. It was a sweet sound, but there was a wrongness to it, a hollow, mimicked quality that made his skin crawl. Slowly, against every screaming instinct in his body, he walked to the back door. He unbolted it, his heart pounding, and opened it a crack. His small, walled backyard was empty. The rain had stopped. The moon shone down on his neat vegetable patch. Sitting in the exact center of the path, pristine and untouched by the damp earth, was a child's toy. A little wooden soldier, painted in bright reds and blues. And pinned to its chest was a slip of paper. On it, in a familiar, frantic script that matched the journal exactly, was a message. "I have found your note. Burn the score and I will play my music on every throat in this street. Starting with the child whose laughter you just heard." Finch staggered back, slamming the door and bolting it. He sank to the floor, hugging the journal to his chest, weeping with terror and despair. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. He was trapped. He was the bearer of a cursed scripture, and to destroy it was to unleash the very horror he sought to prevent. The following days were a special kind of hell. Finch carried the journal with him everywhere, a cancerous weight in his pocket. He felt the listener's attention constantly, a pressure at the back of his skull. The world continued to thin around him. He saw the pulsing, organic walls in his peripheral vision more frequently. He heard the wet, shushing sound in the rustle of leaves, in the rhythm of the printing presses in the street. The world was becoming a veil, and behind it, the eye was opening. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't finish the symphony. He couldn't destroy the score. There was only one option left. He had to hide it where it could never be found. Not in a police vault. Somewhere deeper. Somewhere forgotten by time and God. He remembered a place from his childhood. A section of the South Bridge vaults, sealed off during construction centuries ago and never reopened. A pocket of absolute darkness buried beneath the city. It was a place of silence. Perhaps enough silence to smother the dreadful song. He gathered his tools, a heavy crowbar, a lantern, a rope. He waited for the deep of night. The streets were empty as he made his way to the old access point, a disguised trapdoor in a derelict building near the bridge. He pried it open, the rust screaming in the silence, and descended into the earth. The air was thick and cold, smelling of stagnant water and centuries of decay. His lantern light was a fragile bubble in an ocean of black. He navigated the labyrinth of crumbling brick passages, his footsteps echoing ominously. Rats skittered in the darkness, but even their sound seemed muted, hushed. He found the wall he was looking for, an uneven patch of older stonework, marking the seal. He set to work with the crowbar, the metallic screech of it against the mortar unnaturally loud in the suffocating quiet. He worked with a frantic, desperate energy, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. Finally, with a groan of shifting stone, a section of the wall gave way. A wave of even colder, older air washed out from the darkness beyond. It carried a smell that made his stomach clench, not decay, but a dry, ancient dust, and that faint, sweet, coppery tang he remembered from Wind's End. He hesitated, a primal fear screaming at him to turn back. But he thought of the child's laughter, the wooden soldier. He pushed through the hole. The chamber beyond was small and circular, like a forgotten crypt. The walls were bare stone. In the center of the floor was a simple, dark hole, an old well, or a oubliette, its opening covered by a rotten wooden grate. This was it. The perfect hiding place. He approached the edge, holding his lantern over the hole. He could see no bottom, only an infinite blackness. He took the journal from his pocket. Holding it felt like holding a live coal, vibrating with malignant energy. "This ends with me," he whispered into the void, his voice swallowed by the darkness. As he moved to drop the book, a sound froze him. It was a soft, wet, sloughing sound coming from behind him. He turned slowly, raising his lantern. The thing that had squeezed itself through the hole in the wall was not an animal. It was not human. It was a nightmare of anatomy. It seemed to be constructed of the parts of the flayed victim from Wind's End, but reorganized, repurposed with a terrible, alien logic. Muscles and tendons knit together into a multi-limbed, pulsating form that dragged itself along the ground. It had no head, but in the center of its mass, where a heart might be, was a single, staring, human eye. And from within its form came the wet, rhythmic shushing sound of breathing lungs. It was a fragment. A piece of the listener's reality pushed through the thinning veil. A chord of the terrible symphony, given flesh. It moved towards him, not with speed, but with an inexorable, patient purpose. Finch screamed and hurled the journal into the blackness of the oubliette. He didn't wait to hear it hit the bottom. He turned to run, but the thing was between him and the exit. It lunged. Not to attack him, but to embrace him. A cold, wet limb, slick with a substance that was not blood, wrapped around his leg. Where it touched, his uniform trousers smoked and dissolved, and a cold so intense it felt like fire shot through his nerves. He swung the crowbar, connecting with a sickening thud. The thing recoiled, the eye blinking in what might have been surprise or pain. It was enough. He scrambled past it, through the hole, back into the passageway. He didn't look back. He ran, his lantern bouncing, casting mad shadows. He could hear it behind him, that wet, sloughing, scraping sound, moving faster now, following him through the labyrinth. He burst out of the trapdoor into the night air, gasping and sobbing. He slammed the door shut and dragged heavy rubble over it, sealing it. He stood there, trembling, waiting for the sound of it scratching from below. It never came. He stumbled home, a broken man. He had done it. He had hidden the journal. The symphony could not be completed. He had won. He poured a full bottle of whiskey down his throat and fell into a stupor asleep on his kitchen floor. He was woken by laughter. It was the same hollow, mimicked child's laughter from before. It was coming from inside his house. Terror sobered him instantly. He grabbed his truncheon and crept into the hallway. The laughter was coming from his bedroom. He pushed the door open. The room was empty. But sitting in the center of his bed, perfectly placed, was the little wooden soldier. And next to it, pristine and dry, lay the leather-bound journal. It hadn't fallen into the abyss. It had been returned. The listener had no need of oubliettes. It was in the walls. It was in the silence. It was everywhere the song had been heard. Finch fell to his knees, defeated. He understood now. Silence wasn't a defense. It was the medium through which it traveled. By refusing to speak of it, by trying to bury it, they had only made themselves more alone, more isolated, more perfectly silent for it to listen to. He picked up the journal. The leather felt warm, almost alive. He knew then what he had to do. He couldn't destroy it. He couldn't hide it. The only way to stop the symphony was to ensure no one else ever heard its melody. No one else could ever be tempted to sing. He went to the police station. It was the middle of the night. The desk sergeant was dozing. Finch walked past him, down to the evidence room. He knew the combination to the lead line box. He opened it. Inside were a few pathetic items, a scrap of blood-stained cloth, a knife, a few photographs Wallace had taken that night. He placed the journal inside, on top of the other relics. Then he closed the box and locked it. He took the key. He then went to the archives, the dusty, forgotten basement where records went to die. He found the slim, innocuous file for number 7, Wind's End. He took it. He went to the furnace room in the cellar. He stoked the fire until it roared with an infernal heat. One by one, he fed the file into the flames, watching the paper blacken and curl, the lies and the truth turning to ash together. Then, he took the heavy evidence box and, with immense effort, pushed it into the heart of the fire. The lead lining would take time to melt, but the contents would be incinerated. The journal, the score, the last testament of Erasmus Sibley, would be destroyed. As the fire began to lick at the box, a sound filled the furnace room. It wasn't the roar of the flames. It was a profound, absolute, and utterly furious silence. It was the sound of a great ear being cocked, of a vast attention focusing on him with the weight of a collapsing star. The gas lights flickered and died. The only light came from the furnace, painting the room in hellish, dancing shadows. The shadows began to coalesce, to thicken, to take on a familiar, blasphemous shape. Finch didn't run. He stood his ground, the key to the evidence box clutched in his hand. "It ends," he said, his voice steady for the first time in months. "The song is over. There is no one left to sing for you." The silence pressed in. He felt a coldness beyond cold. He felt his skin begin to prickle, then to hum, as if every molecule was being pulled apart. He was not being attacked. He was being read. Perused. He was a last, unsatisfying note. And then, as suddenly as it came, the pressure vanished. The gaslights flickered back on. The shadows were just shadows. The only sound was the crackle of the fire consuming the last physical evidence of the 1910 case. The listener was gone. It had lost interest. The symphony was incomplete, the score destroyed. The silence was just silence again. Chief Inspector Wallace found him there an hour later, staring into the fire, the key melted into the flesh of his palm. Finch told him everything, breaking the final, greatest rule. Wallace listened in grim silence. When Finch was finished, Wallace simply nodded. "You did right, Constable," he said, his voice heavy. "Now, we never speak of this again. Not to anyone. Not even to each other. This is the last word." It was. The case was buried deeper than ever. McNair was pensioned off, lost in a private sanatorium. Wallace drank himself to death within 2 years. Alastair Finch lived. He collected his pension and moved to that cottage in the Borders. He lived a quiet, solitary life. He never married. He never spoke of his work. He was a model of silence. But on some nights, when the wind is right and the world is utterly still, he will sit bolt upright in his bed, his skin humming with a phantom vibration. And he will hear it, not in the air, but in the silence between his heartbeats, a faint, wet, rhythmic shushing sound. And he knows, with a cold certainty, that it is not over. It is only waiting. Listening for the next discordant note, the next frightened heartbeat, the next lonely, fragile soul who dares to peek behind the veil. Waiting for the silence to be broken, so it can begin the symphony again. Take care, meet the next video.